Greetings and salutations, young true believers. So, I want to talk to you. Well, greetings. It's the first day of the class. Epistemology and metaphysics. So, I suppose, obviously, if you read ahead, you did the reading, you saw in a section called the Philosopher's Toolkit, which is what I'm going to talk to you about today. That he lists 3 tools the philosophers use: arguments, definitions, and thought experiments. And philosophers definitely love definitions, but we'll get into that in a minute. The editor of this text, Stephen Cohen, he notes that every profession has its tools, and carpenters use hammers, saws, blueprints. Scientists use microscopes, telescopes, test tubes, etc. Well, philosophers are no different. The tools that philosophers use are conceptual, however. And so, number one are arguments. What's an argument? It's not what you think of in a traditional sense of argument, in which people are shouting at each other and gesticulating and being, more or less emotional. That's not what it is for a philosopher. An argument is a group of statements, some of which provide grounds or reasons for accepting the third aspect of the argument. So, what I mean, so typically what you're going to have are a number of premises, and it could be one premise, it could be multiple premises, but a premise is that part of the argument that gives you grounds or evidence for accepting the second part of the argument, which is called the conclusion, which contains your stance on an issue, right? And what's an issue? An issue is anything that can be debated rationally, right? We can't debate, say, cherry pie versus peach pie. You can state you have a preference, but you can't debate it. It's what's called a subjective matter, right? So let me give you an example of an argument. What I'm going to give you is what's known as a syllogism, right? It's a 3-line argument, 2 premises, and a conclusion, right? This is what's known as a deductive argument. Deductive. The conclusion of a deductive argument is proven or demonstrated beyond a reasonable doubt, not beyond all doubt. Human beings can't prove anything beyond all possible doubt. Beyond a reasonable doubt, right? So here's the argument. All human beings are mortal. Socrates is a human being, therefore Socrates is mortal. So the conclusion follows necessarily from those premises, right? And this is an example of what's known as a valid deductive argument. In a valid deductive argument, if the premises are true, then conclusion cannot possibly be false, right? Now, in a sound deductive argument is also valid. And now, again, it's important for you to bear this in mind. A valid deductive argument need not necessarily be sound. So what's a sound deductive argument? It's a valid deductive argument whose premises are known to be true, right? Logicians, as a general rule, are concerned with validity. They're not concerned with soundness. Soundness is the purview, presumably, of science. As we go through this course, though, we'll see if there are reasons for perhaps calling that into doubt. But that's what you need to know about arguments. Again, arguments are composed of premises which lend evidentiary or argumentative support to the latter part, which is the conclusion, which contains your stance on an issue. Definitions now. Philosophers love definitions. Why? Because a definition is not the end of a debate, it's the start of a debate, right? So, for example, you take a matter that cannot be adjudicated by science, right? That is to say, it can't be solved by science. Like what? The existence of God. All right. Well, we need a definition of God then, right? And the God of the philosophers, the God of Western philosophy, right? Omnipotent, all-powerful, omniscient, all-knowing, and omnibenevolent, all good, along with eternal and unchangeable. That's the definition philosophers work with when they debate the existence of God, right? Good, clear definitions, right? They lay out the conditions that have to be met for a thing or event to be realized, right? So here's the example from the text. This is on page 9. A geometrical figure is a square if and only if 1, it has 4 straight sides, 2, its sides are of equal length, and 3, it has 4 right angles. It meets those conditions, then it's a square, right? Now, to go a little bit deeper in the book, there are conditions known as necessary conditions. These conditions have to be present in order for a given phenomenon to be realized, right? So, for example, it is a necessary condition for roses to bloom that there be sunlight in the atmosphere. But the presence of sunlight in the atmosphere by itself is not going to give you blooming roses, right? You have to have other conditions, right? Such as rain, warm temperatures, fertile soil, etc. A sufficient condition, by contrast, if a sufficient condition is met, then you are guaranteed to get the end result. So, for example, um, it is a sufficient condition for American citizenship to be born on American soil. That's birthright citizenship, right? That's a sufficient condition. All you have to do is be born on American soil. You are an American citizen, right? And lastly, thought experiments. Now, doubtless you're probably familiar with experiments if you've taken a science class, right? I don't know, you mix chemicals in a Bunsen burner or something like that. You conducted an experiment, right? All right. Well, what philosophers do is we conduct experiments, we construct experiments, I suppose I should say. We construct experiments to test our intuitions, right? Now, Cohen does not explain what an intuition is, right? Um, a an intuition, as I would argue, is a kind of argument from analogy. Now, an analogy obviously is when you compare two things uh, in order to offer elucidation on something that's unfamiliar. So, if you didn't know what cricket was, and I said it's like American baseball, you would have a better understanding what cricket was, right? Well, a philosophical intuition is such that it reminds you of something you've experienced in the past, right? So, philosophers, Cohen writes, seek to justify appeals to intuition by using thought experiments. A thought experiment is a hypothetical scenario or case study in which intuitions are tested. They very frequently take a narrative form, right? The American philosopher Daniel Dennett refers to them as vignettes, right? They pump intuitions. As a matter of fact, Dennett's term for a thought experiment is an intuition pump. So at this point, I think an example or several examples would help. Plato's cave, if you've ever heard of that, Plato argues or asks you to imagine several people chained up in a cave, looking at the wall. Behind them, there's a fire in various shapes, and they think that what they see on the wall is reality. One day, one of them escapes, runs outside, sees the actual world, is dazzled by it, right? Comes back into the cave, tries to explain to everyone what they saw, and they ignore him. They think he's insane, right? Plato uses that as a thought experiment to explain what he thinks ultimate reality is. It's not the reality we're familiar with through our senses, right? Thomas Hobbes uses his thought experiment of the state of nature to explain the state of humanity prior to civilization, which, unlike everybody else during his time, he thought was actually bad, and civilization was much better. Descartes uses his evil demon thought experiment to explain that even if a wicked demon is forcing him to call everything he knows into doubt, what the evil demon cannot do is make him doubt the existence of thought itself, right? So, again, history of philosophy is just replete with great thought experiments, right? And so you're going to see those throughout this course as well. Now, really quickly, because we're starting the first section of this book, epistemology, let me leave you with the definition of epistemology. Epistemology is a philosophical study of knowledge, right? We're interested in knowing what knowledge is, who can be a knower, what constitute necessary sufficient conditions for knowing, right? Can human beings have any knowledge at all, right? Epistemology is as old as philosophy itself. So you're going to get a very detailed overview of the contemporary debates on epistemology in this course. And we'll pick up on that in the next class.